Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Giant Steps Press Go Zoom. My name is Emily Rivera, and today we have with us Randy Roark, the author of Poet's Apprentice. Later, we'll have a reading from this book by Randy himself, along with an interview. Thank you for joining us today, Randy.
Thank you.
We're going to jump right in. So if you could start by explaining the relationship of the Poetic Apprentice book you're publishing with Giant Steps Press with your longer nonfiction work for us.
Yeah, Poet's Apprentice is the beginning of a much longer story. And it begins on the day that I met Allen Ginsberg on January 6, 1980, and continues through the first apprenticeship, which ended about mid-March of 1980. So that's the time frame. And I've chosen to begin there, although the story actually begins like a decade earlier in Connecticut. And this first book is really focusing on that period of time that I was an apprentice, to give people some information about what that experience was like. And also for that period of time, that was my first semester at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics in Boulder, Colorado, which was part of Naropa Institute and now part of Naropa University. So what I've also done is I've tried to recreate and preserve as much of what I was taught that first semester as possible, based on my notes and writings. And Allen's classes themselves were recorded. So this first book is really focusing on the period of time when I was working with Allen every week as an apprentice and studying at Naropa Institute for a BFA in Poetics. That first semester, I took a class with Allen called Basic Poetics. This was the first in a series of classes that he taught. He went to the beginning of the Norton Anthology of English Literature and taught the anonymous poems through the ballads and then through the early days of poems right up until the end of the 16th century, right about like 1610 or so, Marlowe and Raleigh and that crowd. And so what I've done is when Allen was alive, I was a transcriptionist for him, and I transcribed all of his lectures from 1974 to 1983, a decade. And so I have transcriptions of all those classes that he taught in 1980. And so what I've done is distilled what those classes taught. So there's a lot of highly technical information in there related to poetry and writing poetry with meter and stress and breathing and such. And I've summarized that in a little summary of every class so you know what he taught. But then below that are my notes and also reconstructions of conversations and things he said in the class that I think are more generally interesting about his times with Dylan or Kerouac or personal stories. He also did some side lectures in that semester that are really interesting. One he took his own early poems, Gates of Wrath and Empty Mirror, which were the poems he wrote before Howell, and he showed where those poems were influenced by the poetry we were studying in class. So that people were reacting to studying Marlowe. I don't care about this. Why are you teaching me Marlowe? I want Kerouac and Neil Cassidy. And he would show that his early poetry was both inspired by and reflections of this elder poetry that we're reading and writing as well, to sort of justify or explain how he went about teaching poetry to himself. Other classes, he gave a class on how Kerouac composed Mexico City blues, which became a model for me for almost all of my writing that followed. Kerouac was living in Mexico, staying with a friend and living on top of a building on the roof, and he had a little home set up there. He'd wake up in the morning, he'd open up his sleeping bag and air it out. He'd go downstairs, make a cup of coffee, and he'd roll a big joint. You go to the bathroom, get set for the day, sit in a chair, smoke the joint, drink the coffee, and have a pad on it, a little pocket notebook in his lap. And he wouldn't have anything to say. He wouldn't be writing, he'd just be writing a daily record of mind pictures of who he was and what he saw. And then collected over 300 and 400 pages, it becomes a document, much like what I'm trying to recreate in this larger sense of a mind that moves through time, that's influenced by and influences his environment and how that actually works. So that became a model for almost my entire writing career. Another class, he taught blues composition, like how do you improvise blues? And he got us all to be able to improvise like 12-bar blues. And then another class he gave on Shakespeare's songs and all of his plays. Another class he gave looking at Shakespeare and his sonnets, the whole sonnet sequence, which Allen retells the story behind the sonnets in this kind of gangster patois. And another class, Basil Bunting, an important poet, friend of Pound and Yeats, gave a history of poetry from before language to, at the time was 1970, he was lecturing. So we have Allen Ginsberg commenting on Basil Bunting's history of English prosody. So the whole class was sort of rife with a variety of materials that I found useful as a poet. So I'm trying to recreate that. In addition, that semester, I took a class with Stanley Pfefferman in the literature department. He taught a class called Plato to Eliot. And so what we learned was the sort of standard Western white male literary tradition. We learned Plato, Aristotle, Sidney, Shelley, the Johnsons, Ben and Samuel, Pope, and Eliot. And that class wasn't taught with lectures, so I didn't have notes. But for those classes, we were taught in Socratic Dialogue, which is where you come to class having done the reading, and then you have a response. And hopefully I remember to talk a little bit about responses, because that was one of the foundations of the Naropa Institute. But you would come in with your personal reflections on what you read. And I used to be in debating, and I used to love creating opening statements and closing statements where you summarize the case and then you respond to it. You summarize. So that's what I have these summaries of what I was taught and my responses to them for that class. Then my second favorite class at Naropa, other than the apprenticeship, in my whole time there, and I studied there for 8 years, was Reggie Ray's class in 1980 called The Lively Journey. Reggie Ray was an administrator at the school. He was one of Trungpa's main student, and Chogyam Trungpa is the man who started the Naropa Institute. So he had the verification both of the Trungpa and the school itself as being someone that had authority. And he created a class that was mandatory for all program students. And this class explained the whole history and tradition and vision of Naropa Institute, including Jack Kerouac's School of Disembodied Poetics. So in that class, he went through a history of the development of Buddhism from pre-Buddhism through to the present day, a history of the development of the Buddhist ideas about psychology and history and personality, and also education philosophy. So what we did is we learned sort of the intellectual substructure of what it was we were experiencing in class. And for instance, responses was something that was very important in the school. We were taught not to have answers and not to be arguing about what's right or wrong, but it's more, they turn the attention inward. So say, when I read Plato talking about how the poet is inspired by the muse, what were my feelings about that? Not did I agree with it or not? So they were focusing your attention on who you were and how you were interacting with the information, rather than focus being on, I'm arguing you're right and I'm wrong. So we would discuss these issues in an open environment to be able to discuss how we felt, rather than trying to decide who was right. Other things they did were inspired by Nalanda University, which was about 500 AD to about 1000 AD. And there was a Buddhist university started by the Vajrayanas, which was what the local group was. Vajrayana grew out of Hinayana, became Mahayana, became Vajrayana. They're the three sort of stages of Buddhism. And the local group was Vajrayana. Nalanda was Vajrayana. And what they did in that school was they had courses that were taught, but instead of hiring Buddhists to teach them, they would hire the best people in those fields to teach, regardless of what it was that their belief structure or their religion or their culture or whatever, language even. And that wasn't accidental, that was intentional. And they actually, in the student body, went further than that, actually tried to recruit people, as many people as they could from different philosophies, beliefs, religions, so there would be no majority. So you'd never feel like you were in response to the majority. Everybody was on the spot all the time. So if you've got a Hindu and a Buddhist and a Christian and a Muslim, and there's no majority, you're all working it out, and you're who you are and how what you believe is being tested every moment amongst people who have other ideas and beliefs. And that wasn't accidental, that was intentional. So that's something that carried out in this class, because it was mandatory for all the program students. I'm sitting next to a scientist and a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist and a dancer. And so the whole mix, I had to listen to what their concerns were and their responses to this information and offer my own as well. So it was sort of an open dialogue. Now, those classes were lectures, and I'm a writer, so I basically just wrote down as much as I could of what Reggie said in all that class. So I don't think that class was ever recorded, although it was part of every semester for several years. So this may be like the best record of Reggie's class at that time. And then I had a class in Tai Chi. That was my minor. That's a movement class. It's sort of movement meditation. There's not writing involved. There's a couple of brief things that I wrote then that I've included. And I've written a little bit about it because it was one of the most important classes I had as a counterbalance to the thought work that I was doing to become embodied body awareness for twice a day. Became a very important foundation for me as a poet. And then there was the apprenticeship itself. And I met with Alan once a week, and we would look at my poetry, and he would tell me how terrible it was. And we would work on trying to have me understand better to write better poetry. And then during the week between those visits, I would do secretarial work for him. So I transcribed his journals from 78 and 79. I did some research for him in the library. I went to the post office. It was poetry work that he didn't have the time for. So I would do that during the week and study with him in class. And then once a week, we would meet and I'd bring him some poetry and we'd talk about it. So he'd mentioned a reading, so I thought maybe I'd read one of those accounts of one of the days that I spent with Alan. This is the fourth apprenticeship meeting that we had. It was February 2nd. So I've been there about a month.
Can't wait to hear your edited version that you prepared for us today, Randy. So please take it away with your excerpt from Poet's Apprentice, the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics.
I brought my first draft of the poem composed on the typewriter the night before. It's the only thing I've shown him that I didn't have the time to finish. I hadn't even had a chance to go over most of it, except the first stanza. But I brought the whole thing, 4 pages. As I was explaining, Alan grabbed the pages from my hand. The typography quickly lost the structure of a poem and spread out in big clumps with misspellings, missed words, the whole rush of trying to capture what was spiraling out of some distant memory chamber. Not writing, not paying attention to the words, but like watching a movie from the audience. The evening was still in there, but it was happening. But when it was happening, and until now, it was just one of many passing moments, erased by the next moment. But like a Madeleine, the assignment triggered a part of my brain that held the experience intact. Now it was back, unfinished business, all in a lump. It came out in gushes of language, visual memories associated with emotions like scribbles. Even the conversations came back with images. And the images itself were like a Chinese lampshade, camouflaging everything that was really important, or shining through like the light in a movie projector behind the passing film. And the script was a set of images that were rearranged out of chronology into broad chords of feeling that were underneath even that. That was what was playing back to me, what I tried to capture, a piece of music made out of memories. But the writing was without any sense of style. There was no one at the helm. Plus, it was written in a kind of shorthand where most of the references were too personal to be understood by others, like showing someone a photograph of a soldier without telling them it's a photograph of your father, who never returned from the war. It doesn't communicate. It was just language about emotions triggered by memories that others couldn't share. It was the raw material of a poem, but I would need to create a story or some style to hold it all together and become a real poem. That's what I wanted Alan to help with. That's why I wanted him to stop at the end of the first stanza to see if I was going about the transformation of raw data into poem in the right way. But Alan didn't stop where things got messy. He even went through the pages with his head down, reading with more interest than anything I'd ever brought him. Every once in a while, he'd look up and ask a quick clarifying question. Was he in love with you? What do you mean he overdosed on LSD? That's impossible. Did his parents really get back together after the suicide? Where did you get that image of the father sitting alone in the kitchen in the dark? That must be some kind of archetypal image, because that's an image I have of my own father, stumbling in on him in the dark kitchen, everyone asleep, silent and alone, like a sphinx. And then he'd be back to reading before I'd finished answering. Well, I think you have pay dirt here, he said, writing the two words at the top of the page and underlining them. But I continue to insist it wasn't a poem yet. Think of all your questions. There's lots of stuff in there that no one other than me could understand. It's not poetry yet. But it's clear. And he began explaining events and fleshing them out with secret longings and unacknowledged feelings that at first I thought were just Alan's crazy projections. But over the next couple of days, I slowly realized were absolutely true. That's why those moments were so charged. At the time, I was too close and looked away because that's the way I am. But what caused me to look away was still in there, like an image burned in my retina, and I was still looking away from it. My conscious mind could not have written the poem because it didn't have enough information, or it didn't have the right information. The real story was hidden from my conscious mind, but still present in what I remembered, because what I remembered was significant enough that I remembered it. If I had tried to massage the poem into shape, the real message would have been edited out because it wasn't the story I was able to tell. I want to explore this practice further, to write poems and stories I don't understand, that are created from actual memories, the way they come up unexpected. I want to use those moments to instigate writing by letting my memory write, like a waking dream journal, recounting everything I can remember about an encounter, no matter how out of sequence or seemingly random, but not automatic writing. I want to focus on what actually happened, what I've seen and heard, and to write about the present in this way as well, to notice what I notice, when I notice, and write it down, or whatever I remember about a day at the end of it, what people said that made me take note, what I saw that stands out, what I heard that's memorable, what I felt when I felt, and why. I have to find a way to write like this, or I'll stop writing. I don't have word skills or interests. I don't have a musical sense of language. I don't have ambitions in that way. But this is something I can do, something I'm excited about, something I want to learn, exploring something, not repeating my opinions and reinforcing them. I don't have many intense experiences to remember, but who knows? I'd forgotten that one before the assignment. It's clear I remember things that have intense meaning for me that I do not understand. Maybe these memories lay dormant until I'm ready to understand them, like crumbs in a forest on my way to a gingerbread house. This is not just an intellectual exercise or a career move. Alan revealed important things about my life that were invisible to me, through something I had written. What else is in there to be rediscovered? The process seems to be to remember what I remember in the order in which it is remembered. Because who cares if a story from 10 years ago is rightly or wrongly remembered? Even if someone could prove that some of my memories and impressions are misremembered or wrongly reimagined, what could I possibly replace them with? A blank? Someone else's memories? So that's the kind of things that would happen in those meetings, things that wouldn't happen in a classroom. If I had handed that poem in to Alan at the time, he would have made some comments and handed it back to the guy in row A, seat 4. But with the apprenticeship, it doesn't get to be like that. He asked me a question and pry until he found what was underneath that poem to try to understand why I wrote it this way and what it was that he should be telling me to make me write more interesting poems.
In your reading, there is a transition from this mindset of your work not being good enough to accepting Alan's view of how you actually clearly captured an unconscious moment. Where do you think this feeling of your work not being good enough came from?
Well, it's feedback, and not inappropriate feedback either. I want to show you the poem that I brought him that day, that first paragraph, the first stanza that I thought was now a real poem. Like this is, if we can, I don't know if you can see that or not. You probably can't. Can you see that at all?
A little bit.
Well, I'll read it to you. But anyway, the point of it is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines here. And there's like 40 lines of Alan written around it. So this is the poem that I brought him at, this intense emotional experience. And now I've refined it into a real poem. This is the real poem. Memory, I called it. Sky crouched above our heads, roads slowly filled with snow, shadows in the streetlight caught in comic conversation pledged a drunken guarantee, dreams of floating faces, bright coals against the dark. So that's what I brought him. I don't know what anyone could make of that. It's so abstracted from the actual experience to be like nonsensical. And I'll show you what the actual writing, you probably can't see this either, but this is the first page of that poem. And Alan's made 1 addition, 1 subtraction, corrected a misspelling, took out a preposition, and added a word, because I didn't know what the psychiatric hospital in New York was. He knew it was Bellevue. So you can see like what I was bringing him, he was trying to steer me away from. And this is what he wanted. This was so personal to me. I'll just read like it's about people that I don't want to read about. It's very personal. All the rest is stories. I heard about the night you kicked in the dorm window with a shoeless foot and the police followed you home by 1 bloody footprint repeated in the snow all the way to your house a mile away. I was at your wedding. I spent a night at your house in the summer, but I looked at you through vacant eyes sadly, and you looked back as sadly, but looking for life. Craig was over my house the day that I got the call that Michael had put a shotgun in his mouth and put it on a show for the blue sky that night when I went to. So in other words, I took that and I turned it into sky crouched above our heads. Wrote, you know what I mean? I've taken this memory, and for some reason, I think poetry is abstracted and then abstracted again. It's not about the stuff in here. This is too personal. And I do want to say something in my defense. In a poetry school, you're around students, not all of whom are very skilled in how to give feedback constructively. And so when you pour your heart out, or what I felt, that if I poured my heart out, I'd be invulnerable to who knows what in response. So I think part of my abstraction process is basically self-protection, not only there, but I mean, elsewhere in my life as well. So the idea of like, Alan never made me feel like I didn't have it. He made me feel like I wasn't putting it out. He always told me it's in there. Like, we got to get it out. He read this. He knows it's in there. I have a real life. He doesn't know what this is. Like, what is this? I don't know what this is. So the most common thing he said to me was that when you talk about your poetry, you're really interested. I love to hear you talk about it, but your poetry's not interesting. So that's what he's just trying to do. He was trying to steer me. That's what a teacher does. They see what your root skills are and what your potentials are, and then they water those. And it's like a sun, you know. They want to draw you over here to where they think you'll be happier, and you're stuck over here because your mind has hemmed you in. And he's trying to break your mind open. But he never made me feel like I was never going to be a good poet. It was just a matter of like, how do we get you to be you and write a poem?
Yeah, for sure. Taking all of your praise about Alan, and in your work that you just shared with us, you said, Alan revealed important things about my life that were invisible to me through something I'd written. What else is there to be rediscovered? So it's easy to say that Allen Ginsberg, being a mentor to you, helped with that transformation. So how does the book capture that?
Well, not only being the story of that process, because in a way, it's because I've relied solely on material written at the time. There's 3 stories going on. There's my emotional development, me as a person on my life, going through it. There's what I was studying in class, trying to collect as much of that information as possible to hear what I was being influenced by. And then there's the writing itself, because it's written at the time. As time goes on, the influence of what I was being taught becomes evident in my writing. And nowhere, and I'm lucky that Alan was the first class that I had there, because it was a good root and foundation to go in there and start smacking things around. Because in a class, you're more or less anonymous. You know, you can have conversations, you hand in poems, but I feel very protected in a room. I could be in the back of the class and hand in my assignments, and you know, you can stay protected that way. But the apprenticeship, for hours, I'm sitting there and he's asking me questions. And one of the most important things about what I learned from Alan, and that no one else would have ever done, is that he asked me questions that I could only answer from, like, those ideas of responses. I could only answer from my, people say your heart or something, but it's not in my head. I couldn't answer in my head. I couldn't answer these questions in my head. And I could only answer them out of like how I felt and who I was and what I did. And I kept answering out of that place for hours at a time until he gave me myself. And so I could learn how to talk about myself to other people as well. He helped me to explore those feelings by asking me questions, not giving me answers, not telling me what to think, but asking me questions that I have to go, well, I don't like that. Well, why not? And then I have to explore why I don't. Or why don't you do that? Well, I don't. Well, why don't you? So what that happened, but the difference is he's actually going in there and like, you know, breaking legs to reset them and stuff. He's doing serious work. And the apprenticeship is the only place that you would possibly be able to do that. And to tell you the truth, I apprenticed with other teachers and nobody was like Alan. Alan was like the full menu. He was fully awake and he was not going to stop until he was exhausted. So, I mean, literally, I would wear out from the attention. He was still going strong. And I was like, can I go home, please? You know, there's a lot of work for me. And also I have a certain personality. It's very sheltered and very protective and doesn't feel safe exposing myself. And so Alan, it's all about being exposed. It's all about, you know, manifesting who you are. The only time you can manifest it, which is this life.
Very cool. In your book, you also said that you did 2 pilgrimages a year from 2005 to 2015 and listened to some of those experiences. What is something you learned from your travels that found your way into the book?
I think it actually the reverse of that, because the traveling didn't happen until much later, when I could afford it, literally. And also, the first time I traveled was in 1990, and I traveled alone. And so a lot of those traveling later became important because I learned how to travel alone. But the real effect I see is the reverse. I can see all these ideas that I was introduced to in this first semester of the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, and how that became my whole life. I lived out so many of these ideas. And so for me, the ideas that inform my travels come from my education in these early days, but the traveling wasn't an application of this until much later. I didn't start traveling. My first time I had a passport, first time I went to Europe was after I graduated from my Master of Fine Arts with Naropa. So there's not a lot of influence on traveling on the early part.
Will that be expected in your next books that are focused on this journey?
There's going to be quite a few books. It's 29,000 pages long. I wrote for 39 years. So the thing is, I'm just going to be working on this material going forward in the, you know, forward going way. And so the traveling starts in 90. And once I graduate from Naropa, it's all different. I'm using Naropa for my life. I'm not, this one I'm focused on Naropa and the Jack Kerouac School because it's about what I was taught. But the book's about my life and how I you know, used all this stuff in my life and what I learned and what I did with it.
Would you say you were successful at your goal of living an interesting life?
Well, that's a tough question because when I went to the St. Louis Art Museum one time with a girlfriend and some friends, and it's a huge art museum. And there was a traveling exhibit and we walked in together and then we went off in our different ways. And the first room was about the size of a basketball court. And I was about halfway through and there was a Van Gogh painting and I could see it so close. And I realized that he had taken yellow paint and green paint on either side of the brush. And then he was painting, not flat painting, but he was painting like impasto or whatever. It's like building up layers. There was like peaks and valleys, and they had been sort of black in the shadow, and then yellow on one side and green on the other. And so as you moved a little bit, it would flicker. And I felt this hand on my shoulder. As my girlfriend, she said, "We're all in the gift shop, like if you're ready to go." So to say I had an interesting life is kind of, it's not a very useful term, because interesting to who? But I think that interested life would be a better way of putting it. I wanted to live a vibrant life. I wanted to be like fully aware that I was alive. I wanted to max out this experience of being alive. I wanted to do everything that I wanted to do. So my life was my artwork. My life was what I focused on. And the writing was a reflection of that and becomes its own thing. But it's really kind of about living my life, and then what I chose to do and how it turned out.
It's really cool. Can you explain like your top 3 moments of your life, or transformative moments that you've had, or moments you've enjoyed?
There's 3 moments that I had traveling that have been really important in my life. Transformative, literally, and that there's before and after. The first one was in 1990, and it was my first trip abroad. Like I said, first time I had a passport. I went to get my last 3 credits for my master's at Brunenberg Castle, which is where Ezra Pound's daughter and his library and a lot of artifacts and his son and Olga Rudge, his girlfriend, Mary's mother, were there. And I went there and studied with John Gary and the University of New Orleans program. And there's a bunch of scholars and poets and Pound freaks. And after that, it was the first time I traveled, and I was by myself. So I thought I'd take a 7-month leave of absence from the hospital. I worked in the emergency room, and I would just celebrate and do everything that I wanted to do in Europe. And I'm dyslexic, and my brain is kind of funny, and I get lost really easy, and I don't travel well. And so it's a bit of a nightmare for me when I travel alone, especially I was in 14 countries, only 2 of which spoke English, and I'm a monoglot. And the moment that I'm taught that was transformative was about 2 months in. I'd gone to Lisboa, and I was writing my paper for my last 3 credits. And when that was finished, I went to England to do a tour with Nancy Covey, who was Richard Thompson, the guitarist's wife, and to travel with these French, British folk musicians, Fairport Convention, Robin Williamson, Dougal MacLean, and learn British folk music from the real people. But I had to get from Lisbon up to London, and there was a train that did that. It was a night train, and I thought I'd sleep on the train. But I got on, and it was a party train, and we're a little cabin, and people were drinking and partying, so I didn't sleep. And we got to Paris, and they just let us off at the South station, and I had to get to the North station, which was a adventure. And I haven't been asleep for like 30 hours at this point. And then it was a train to the coast, Calais, I think, and then a ferry over to London. And so the ferry, I thought I'd sleep on the ferry. It was a night crossing, but it's one of those, those night crossings. And so I threw up and I couldn't sleep. And then I'm on the bow of the boat in the morning. It's still dark out, and I'm just standing there, and I watch the world sort of lighten up. And then I can see land, and it's England. Oh my God, we've been on the water for so long. It's like, oh, that's it, we're there. And I'm feeling pretty good, feeling better. And then the morning boats, the fishing boats, start coming out. We're going into the channel for the Thames, and we're on the right, they're on the left. And the first boat comes out, and it's like chum, 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 and the little white puffs of smoke coming out of the back, and it's slowing down and wants to avoid us. But then when it gets past us, it goes, boom, and the stern sinks, and the bow goes up, and the birds are flying behind them, all the gulls, and and then there's another one, chug, 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 and they're smoking cigarettes, and they're waving, I'm waving, chug, 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 and then one after another. And then it was the morning, and everything was dew. And it's like everything was sparkling and everything was alive. And for the first time in that trip, it was enough that it was me to see that and experience it. Because I was living with a woman, I love this woman. And for 2 months, every time I had a beautiful moment, experienced something, because it wasn't shared, I felt it was almost like it was worse than if it didn't exist, like it wasn't real if I didn't share it. So every time I saw something that was beautiful, I felt like missing an absence of sharing it with somebody. So this moment, it was enough that I saw it. In fact, it was better than enough. It was the best enough ever. It was better than if I was sharing with somebody, because I could go all the way into it. And that ruined me in many ways for the rest of my life. Like, I wanted to marry that when we came home, we broke up, and I've never lived with another woman. All my traveling is done solo. Now not only is it enough that I experience everything by myself, it's only real if I experience things. And I travel with other folks, and there's social occasions, and I have fun, and it's what I'm doing. But I saw the perfect example of this in a film the other day. It's a series of films about these two actors and friends that go to Italy and Spain, and they're friends and actors in real life, but they're in a movie as well. And at one point, they're in Italy, and they're walking in a corridor in a museum, and the ceiling is beautiful, and both sides of the walls there's all these paintings, and they're surrounded by beauty. And the whole scene is them walking down the hallway, looking at their feet, talking about their personal lives back in England. And that for me is sort of like a image of what, traveling is like with people, as opposed to traveling by yourself. Because when you're by yourself, you do everything you want to do for as long as you want to do it. You eat when you want to eat, you go to sleep. And my whole life is really built up like that now. So that was the first one. That was really important change. The second one is a little bit more complicated to explain. I'll try. In 2016, I was 62, 62. And I walked the Santiago de Compostela, the Camino, to the cathedral in Spain. So you walk across the country of Spain, basically, from east to west. And I started on this side of the Pyrenees. I didn't do the whole thing from France. I did the whole thing from Spain. And like I said, I get lost real easy. I'm dyslexic. My brain jumbles up information. So this was a 37-day hike that I took. And the first day, within a half an hour or 45 minutes, I got lost. And I walked 2 miles out of the way in the wrong direction. And 90 minutes of that was arguing with me about whether I had taken a wrong turn or not. And then finally, at the end, you realize you got to turn around. Not only have you walked 2 hours out of your way, now you have to walk 2 hours back to get to the point where you lost the trail. And now you have a full day's hike in front of you. So the first day, which is the big day, the first day, the only day you've done this, to add on to the difficulty, I added another 12 miles on top of what was already 14 or 16 miles on the first day. So that's where I began. And I was ready to quit right then. It was a very difficult experience. Like, oh my God, I was looking for a cab, but there's no cabs. It's cross country. So anyway, as I went along, I would continue to get lost, but it would be less and less every day. And I started to notice something, like I'd get this feeling in my body, this kind of awkward, anxious feeling, this kind of a nerved feeling. And that would go on for a while. I wouldn't know what caused it, but I started to associate with getting lost. And then, so I started paying attention to my anxiety, and I started to realize that it was always right. When I've had that feeling, and I'd go back, it was like, oh, the last day that it happened was 3 days before the end. And I was walking, and I lifted my foot up just like a million times before, but I felt kind of funny. And I put it down, and I was feeling funny. And I picked up the next leg, and I was like, whoa. And I looked to my left at that moment, and there was the scallop shell directing me to the left. But I had missed it because it had been overgrown with ivy. So those are combined with 2 other experiences I'm having in that hike. The first day, my body just took over. I'm usually intellectually present, and I'm usually experiencing things through my intellect. It was as if my intellect shut down, like powered down, and I was just my body. And my body knew what to do. And my body put me in bed, and I went right to sleep. I woke up in the morning before the alarm. I didn't like gradually wake up. I woke up, and then it was like, okay, now it's got to get out of the bed, because the faster you start, the faster you get there. And I go in, and everything was ready. Everything would just happen in the right. And then I was like out and doing my thing. And I began to realize that my body is who I am. in essence. My body was taking that hike. And my body realized, like, that first day, you're not the guy that I want in control of this. You're not making the right decision, so I'm taking over. And my body was aware, just like in that poem, I was aware of something that I wasn't aware of. My body knew that I had left the trail. It was convincing my head that I had left the trail, because I think I know where I'm going and I know where I'm on the right trail. So my body is literally arguing to get control with my head of, so I had this funny visual idea of who I am. And the answer is, I was my body, and my body's doing everything. My body's experiencing everything that my head has told it to do. And then my brain is interpreting my body's signals. So for instance, I also noticed when I got hungry, I'd feel something like a twinge, and then I keep walking because I'm thinking, and then it'd take like 3 times, and I go, oh, I'm hungry. And then I'd start directing my body like, okay, well, let's look for a restaurant. So this image I had, my body is living my life. I'm really my body, actually. The only thing that's essential is my body, because when my body dies, I die. And then my awareness is kind of like a helium balloon, like one of those birthday balloons, like bobbing along, like, oh, look at the birds, look at the boats coming out of the Thames, and, oh, it's raining here. And it's like, it's attached to my body, but it's not really, it's just easily distracted. And then my thoughts, which if you're walking alone for 37 days, you're really sick of your thoughts. You distance your, so they were like black smoke coming out of the back of my head. So I had this vision of myself, a body walking with a balloon with the awareness, kind of a goofy balloon, like attached, thinking that it's the boss, but it's like a appendage or something. And then there's smoke pouring out the back of my head as I motor my way to Santiago. So that idea about being a body is something I can call back. That experience of feeling that I am my body. Like right now, like getting ready for this conversation, I sat in my chair for like a minute or so and said, okay, body, like, how are you doing, body? So I can actually use that information. If I don't like my thoughts, I can use that information, that illustration. If I don't like my awareness, and I'll always be my body. So that was a really important one for me as well. And then the last one is actually the end of the book, the 39th year of the book. I hadn't known how to end the book. I began to think it was going to be like Anna East Nin's diaries. It ends when you die. I mean, how could you end the book any other way other than that? Because it's basically the story, this continuing story. And I tried to end it a couple of times before, and then I just kept writing, and it seemed important writing, not like just add-ons. It seemed like I was taking the story further. So in 2018, I'm 64, I walked and bused and took a train and took a cab, but I traveled the southwest coastal path of England, which is something I forget. It took me 57 days, and it was like 575 miles or something like that. And it was terrible. It was like one of the worst experiences I've ever had. I'll never do that again. I think it was just horrible. And I won't go into why, but it was horrible. And the last day was the worst. And it's, first of all, it started raining near the end. And so when I got in the night before the last day, it started to really pour. And then I heard it rain all night long. I couldn't sleep. It was just thundering down rain, and it didn't lessen, and I couldn't sleep. And I woke up or got up early in the morning, and I'm just going to push my way through this experience. And so the coastal path is literally constructed off of a mountainside. So you have a mountain slope that goes like this. And then somewhere in there, the Corps of Engineers came in and they hammered out a wall and the floor. And so you're walking along a mountain that rises next to you. And beside you is the mountain continuing down to the ocean. And the path is maybe 3 feet, something like that. You can pass people. You have a pack on your back too, but you can pass people. You don't pass people though, many, because everyone's walking in one direction more or less. But anyway, I'm walking, and it's raining so hard that my visor is down. So I'm looking at my feet, and all I can see is my feet, and it's all wet, and there's leaves, and it's slippery, and there's a fall down to the ocean. It's not really great weather. And I came around, and all of a sudden I looked up, and the whole path was gone. There'd been a rock slide, and it was now in the ocean, and there's no way to keep going. I'm about an hour and a half out at this point. which means I've got to walk back an hour and a half. And then as I go back, I run into people behind me. And then suddenly I realize, oh my God, I was the first one, because there's nobody in front of me, unless, and then I go, oh my God, what if people, I thought I could have been on that. I could have fallen into the sea. And now I'm scared because there's like 7 of us. What if our weight, this is terrible. What's going on? And then we got back to the beginning. We had to leave somebody there and go get somebody to come and close off the trail. And so by noon, I'm starting the day's hike. And it's been pouring rain this whole time. And I am miserable. I hate this. And I'm no longer on the trail. I'm on back roads. And English back roads are barely wide enough for 1 car, much less 2. And then they have on either side of the road, they have hedges that are like 8 feet tall that are filled with water this morning. And so I'm walking facing traffic on a road. And then the road is windy. So you don't want to be on a corner when that car comes around a corner. So you got to look, and then you're crossing the road back and forth to stay at it. And then you're adding miles and miles and miles. And then because the rain is so intense, I'm looking at my feet splashing on tar for hours. Splash, splash. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? This is crazy. You're not enjoying this. This is a horrible experience. And then, but I thought, you're going to make it. You're going to make it. And then at the end, there's a post with a sign on it that says, this is the end. Now at Santiago, you're walking towards a cathedral. So 4 hours before you see the cathedral, you see the spire above the rooftops. And then every time, and then you lose it and you come back, and every time you lose it, come back, it's a little bit bigger. But you never see the cathedral until literally you're right in front of it, because you're walking down this hill and there's buildings on either side. So for 4 hours, you're like, oh, the spire, oh. And then at the very end, it's like a chute. And you come out at the very end, and then you're in this giant courtyard, and there's the cathedral there, and like you're there. And there's this tradition where when you reach the cathedral, you put your hand on it. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. But suddenly I get it, because for 4 hours you are walking, and you've got this pace going on, and you're going downhill. You really got some moves going down this hill. You're rolling. And then you come out and you're just shattered. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, the cathedral, and you're psychologically shattered. And then there's all this open space after. And you're just like, and then you're like, oh, I got to touch the cathedral. And you're still walking at that pace. And then you're like, bam. And you hit that cathedral and something happens. And I don't know what it is, but it's just, and then you're stopping physically, and you're stopping emotionally, and you're stopping psychologically, and you're there, and you finally made it after 37 years. This is a sign on a concrete pier and pool. And then you have to get on a ferry, and there's cars honking and exhaust, and people are yelling, and you're going across the bay, and then you have to get on a bus, and it's crowded. You have to wait for the bus, and then you get on the bus, and then they let you off at the bus station. And it's where the heroin kids and the meth kids are all hanging out playing soccer. And so I went on a walk, because I got there before my bed and breakfast opened, and I got an adventure, and I got lost. I won't go into that part. But the part I want to get to, at the end of that adventure, I came upon a park bench, and I wanted to write down a haiku. So I saw this park bench, and I sat down, and I'm over in front of Pool Harbor, and I write my haiku. I'm writing it, and all of a sudden, this dog, this like lab, comes up, and it's like the woman's, oh, Bosco. I'm like, no, it's cool. Like, I'm cool. Like, look, smell my hand. I'm cool. And this guy comes up, and he's got a dog, and they're sniffing each other, like, hey, how you doing? We're talking, and what did you do? I just finished the hike, and they told me things to do. I'm staying a couple days, and they disappeared. It's like, oh my God, my whole mood has changed. And the sun was out, and it stopped raining when I was on the bus. Sun was out. Everyone's out on their bikes and the prams and throwing the frisbee. And then I'm looking on the bay, and it's all got what Pound described as sun dazzle. And I always see it as like sun dazzle. It's all sun dazzle all over the water. And then these white sailing ships are going in and out. And then there's that ferry that I hated. It's like, wow, it's really beautiful. And behind it was October. So all the leaves were like on fire. And suddenly, like whoosh, this feeling came over me. And it was all that stuff that you went through the day, the mountain and the loss of the trail and the hanging out with those people and fixing that stuff in the roads. It's over. You made it. Like all those challenges and stuff, it didn't matter. You made it. It's over. That this day is over. You made it. And I was like, I was feeling so good about that. And then next was like, whoosh, this hike is over. I haven't told you I went, but all this crazy stuff that went on for almost 2 months, August through October, you made it. It's here. You're done. You're done. And I thought back to something that a friend of mine had said on day 53. I'd written a friend of mine who knows me really well. And I said, I am the worst traveler. I am terrible. I make bad decisions. I make rash decisions. I make intemperate decisions. I make the wrong decisions. I'm stubborn. I'm obstinate. My brain doesn't cooperate. What am I doing this for? Like, it's just such a struggle. I'm such a failure. I'm so embarrassed. I'm embarrassed all day. I'm embarrassed to ask for help. I'm embarrassed not to ask for help. Why am I doing this? And she wrote back. She said, Randy, you are on the 53rd day of your 57-day solo hike. You are where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there. I think you're doing okay. And that feeling extended to on the end of this hike, I am where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be there. In fact, I'm early. So suddenly this feeling of being this complete, failure at this was that, oh no, I succeeded. And then I sort of sat there. I was like, oh, now this is it. I can go home and my adventuring is done. I don't need to do any more adventuring. And I've got this big manuscript at home that I've been writing. The rest of my life till I die, I can go home. And I've been doing this. I retired at 61. So at this point, I've been for 3 years, I've been working on this manuscript and loving it. It's the life I always imagined. It's the writer's life. I get up in the morning. I don't have to do anything. I do what I want to do. I answer emails, read some mail, have breakfast. And I work and I open up a document. It's like, oh my God, I'm back in whatever part of my life, and I'm reliving my life, and I'm re-understanding my life, or understanding it for the first time. And then when I don't want to do that, I stop and I do something else. This is the life that I imagined that a writer had back when I was like 12, but I have that now. And it's so that you can do that. It's all over. Like, so I saw my whole life played out to the end. Just get up every day and more of this. And then this third thing, whoosh. It's like, you made it. It's like your life. You won. You are 64 years old, sitting on a park bench after a 57-day solo hike under Europe. You have no money problems. You don't have to worry about money anymore. It's going to worry you off. You don't have to worry about money. You've got something to do that you love for the rest of your life. And it worked out when you were worried and anxious, and the whole time you're afraid, is it not going to work out? Well, guess what? It worked out. And I know, like Solon said to Croesus, that judge no man lucky who's not yet met his end. I know that something terrible could happen tomorrow, but up through age 67, I've lived the life that I want to live. And I'm not on this in a gutter. Like my parents told me, you can't live your life the way you want to live it. You're gonna have to sacrifice. But I did it. I'm not on the side of the walk, side on the sidewalk, asking people for money. I'm not, crazy or insane so it was this feeling like, oh, like I did it. My life is perfect. Really, if you look back, if you want, it arranged itself on its own to put me at a place where I could realize at 64, oh, it's time to go home and become a hermit and to build your hermitage and spend the rest of your life reading and publishing this document of your life. So I got this feeling that my life was perfect. And that's another thing that I can call back at any time. If I'm having some difficulty, especially recently, if somebody says no to me, like I want to do something and the answer is no, instead of that being a disappointment or making me angry, it's like, oh my God, that's great. It's perfect. Because now I can take that energy that was a struggle to do something that I wanted to do that wasn't working and put it in something that I was working. So that was the feeling that I can call back as well. That was transformative, that my life really is perfect. And it wasn't me that arranged it. Like it wasn't me that wrote that poem that Alan responded to. And that's what I kept like, who is that person? Well, that person is that body that saw and heard all that stuff. That was the body that took the walk to Santiago. That's who I am. I'm that body. And that body made the decisions that got me to the end of Santiago, got me to the end of Pool Harbor, and got me to that park bench at 64 to then know that it's time to go back to work on the book. So those would be, I'd say, the three most important moments that I had in traveling that have parlayed themselves into literature.
That's really cool. You sound really impacted, and I'm so happy that you shared that with me today.
Oh, good, thanks.
No
You're the
problem.
first person I ever told those stories to.
Woohoo, go me. But I wanted to thank you for joining us today, Randy, and giving us insight into your book and your experiences. Everyone who's watching, if you enjoyed the reading from Poets Apprentice or want to see where the story goes, stay tuned to Giant Steps Press Facebook, where we will announce when the book will be released and how to purchase it. And thank you again.
Thank you.